Good afternoon, and welcome again to the COVID midweek update. Thank you very much for joining. All right, so I think let's start with where we are with the data. And all right. All right, we are coming down, fortunately. Not as kind of one would really expect as we saw with the second and first waves. There's a little bit of a kind of a flattening out here, and that's probably mainly due to the epidemic in the Western Cape. So if we look at the breakdown of the provinces, you see Gauteng, that's over here, which had by far the highest level of COVID, came down quite markedly. The typical kind of trajectory coming down quite markedly. There was the Western Cape increasing still, Northern Cape increasing, and KwaZulu-Natal increasing. And if you look at the individual provinces, Gauteng is coming down very nicely. And just really to kind of point out how much greater the third wave was in Gauteng as compared to the first and second waves in Gauteng. But just to again emphasize that we're not at baseline yet, there still is quite a lot of activity, although of course it is coming down quite well. Different in the Western Cape, still climbing up. Will it exceed the second wave? It's almost there now, 47.1 per 100,000, as against 48 per 100,000 in the second wave, but it is still increasing. So they're really, at the moment, bearing the brunt of the third wave of COVID. KZN is difficult to really kind of interpret. We had this kink over here due to the unrest and obviously a dearth of reported information. And that may well still be occurring now. Certainly KZN is increasing. And from our clinical colleagues in the hospitals, they are certainly feeling a great stress of COVID in that province. So I'm not quite sure really how to interpret this curve, but I suppose the important thing is that it is still on the increase in KZN. And coming back to Gauteng, the Hatsola home monitoring, active cases coming down quite nicely, and also new cases coming down quite nicely. So now I'm going to do something which maybe I'm a little bit, I shouldn't be doing, and that's to try and predict what's going to happen with regard to a fourth wave. And the reason I want to mention this is I'm getting so many questions. People want to plan holidays or planning weddings or planning bar mitzvahs and so on. What's going to happen with the fourth wave? We are coming down nicely, but it's interesting if you look at the first, the second, and the third waves. These waves come in a sort of kind of regular periodicity. There's an increase in susceptibility in the low, when the curve is down, increased susceptibility, increase infections. As the infections increase, there's increased immunity, build-up of immunity, and then it comes down again as the population becomes immune. There's not enough susceptibles for the virus, and then we go through the cycle of susceptibility, and then immunity, susceptibility, and immunity. And, you know, if we kind of even superimpose, or shall I say extrapolate these curves, and if it's going to have the same periodicity as we had for the first, second, and third waves, then the fourth wave should come exactly in the holiday season, the end of November, beginning of December, peaking in the mid-holiday season. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to do this, but this is, if it does maintain the periodicity, we can kind of reasonably extrapolate that that's what's going to happen. The mathematical modelers do the same thing. They take all this data, feed it into a mathematical model system in the computer, and then make the predictions. And this is more or less what they are predicting, to have a fourth wave. How severe the fourth wave will be, that we really don't know. Because the other factor, and this is really the unpredictable factor, is the variants. And it's really the variants which have been the main factors driving these waves. So we look at India, for example, where the Delta variant arose originally, first detected. And that's responsible for a massive epidemic in India. We've got a lot of media coverage, as you recall. So the Delta variant caused that wave in India. In South America and Brazil, they mainly dominated by the Gamma variant. We don't get it here. And the Gamma variant drove up their main wave. And as we see in our waves in South Africa, it was, remember, the first wave was the ancestral, the original variant. Then the beta variant, the one which was resistant to antibiotic, to the vaccine, or relatively resistant to the vaccine, that drove the second variant. And then the Delta variant is what's driven the third variant. Now, when and where and how these variants will arise, that we really don't have the tools to be able to predict with any degree of accuracy. We do feel that there will be new variants arising. We don't know, will they be more contagious? Will they cause more severe? Will they be more resistant to vaccines like the beta was, the Delta with regard to contagiousness? That at this stage, we really don't know at this stage. All right, where are we with vaccines? Well, we've reached just under 9 million doses and increasing vaccination. A little bit disappointing in that the daily administration has dropped a little bit. It was, if you recall, a week ago, past 200,000. We're trying to get to 300,000 by the end of the month, and it's dropped quite a bit to 176,000. So there's a bit of leeway that's going to need to be caught up. You can see it on this graph over here. We reached a peak of just under 270,000 a few weeks ago, and now it has dropped disappointingly to 167,000. The breakdown, the 8.8 million, just under 2 million of Johnson & Johnson, so these people have been fully immunized. With regard to the Pfizer vaccine, 5 million have received the first dose, so they're partially immunized, and just under 2 million the second dose. So these 2 million plus this 1 million are the number of people that have been fully immunized. So where are we with our vaccination coverage? Fully vaccinated, 9.3% of the population have received either the one dose of Johnson & Johnson or 2 doses of Pfizer, or 6.2% of the total population, including children. Partially vaccinated who received the first of the 2 doses of Pfizer, that's 12.8 or 13% of the population as of yesterday. And again, looking at these figures, we've dropped a bit in terms of our daily vaccination. That needs to be caught up. And you can see comparative to the last week and the previous weeks, 5 weeks ago, 3.6% were fully vaccinated, increasing up to 9.3%, partially vaccinated from 7.7% up to 12.8%. Interesting graph, this one. If you look at this figure over here, it's interesting that the females outnumber males by quite a significant amount. If you look at the 60-plus age group, which are the key group that we want to get vaccinated, the older section of the population, 32% females as against 20% males. In fact, in all these age groups, females outnumber males. I can't give a good explanation for that. Maybe one of the listeners or one of the viewers can talk to that. A little bit worried about the 60-plus, though, age group, and that only about 50% of the 60-plus, which is the key age group that we do want to cover with the vaccinations as the kind of main prime aim of vaccination. So we have to do a bit of work on the 60-plus age group as well. So just to summarize, the vaccine program is progressing reasonably well, a bit disappointed for the last couple of days in terms of daily vaccination. And we still got quite a significant backlog to catch up if we're going to get to the majority of the adult population immunized by early next year. A question which often comes up is Pfizer versus Johnson & Johnson. Don't really like making these comparisons generally because these trials are done under different circumstances, different seasons, different geographies, different demographic situations, different endpoints that are looked for. So while I'm saying that, I thought I'd do just give this data where a trial was done with Pfizer. Oops. The trial was done with Pfizer Let me get it back onto here. In the Sasonki, again, in healthcare workers, similar to what was done with the Sasonki study, which remember in the early part of the year with our healthcare workers, with the one dose of Johnson & Johnson. In South Africa, they looked at 477,000 healthcare workers, which were part of the Sasonki trial. Of the 477, 11,348 had breakthroughs. In other words, had infections despite vaccination, 2.4%. And we look at a similar study done in the United States, reported in the New England Journal of Medicine very recently, last week, where they looked at 1,497, much smaller sample, but a similar sample of healthcare workers. And on the sample, 39 had breakthrough infections. 2.4% for Sasonki, 2.6% for Pfizer. So these two vaccines are more or less really on a par in terms of efficacy. And I'm getting many, many questions. People who had the one dose of Johnson & Johnson, mainly healthcare workers who are asking these questions, should they have a booster dose of Pfizer? At this stage, probably not advised. Two reasons. The one reason is that we haven't really trialed Pfizer as a boost to Johnson & Johnson. What has been examined is Pfizer's boost to AstraZeneca, which works quite well. So we're not quite sure, is this going to boost much from the Johnson & Johnson? The evidence doesn't seem to point that it will do very much because the immune response, even at 280 days after vaccination with J&J, is still pretty good, and a booster is not going to push it up very much beyond that. And similarly, people that had 2 doses of Pfizer ask me, should they get a third? Again, there's robust, durable immunity, and a booster at this stage is not going to do very much. Probably in time to come, we will need boosters, maybe next year, and maybe on a regular basis. But at this stage, it probably is a little bit early to think of boosters. Well, I now want to just go into some of the questions which have come my way. And first question is it possible to get a false positive on the PCR test? The PCR test, the test that is diagnosing infection. And this becomes important. People that are in isolation, should they have a PCR test to de-isolate? In other words, to see that they've got a negative and therefore can be de-isolated. We don't recommend that. It's really not necessary. It can be confusing. You should isolate for the period of time, 10 days after infection, and then after that period of time, come out of isolation without the test. With regard to false positives on the PCR test, yes, it is possible. These tests are infallible. The PCR test is an excellent test. It's got about 97 to 99% sensitivity, so you're unlikely to get a false negative. And similarly, a 97 to 98% specificity, so you're unlikely to get a false positive. The main reason for a false negative is probably an inadequately taken specimen. So there's not enough material on the nose swab or on the throat swab to be able for the test to actually register. That's the most common reason why we get a false negative. False positives can occur occasionally, but they're very, very rare. Similar thing with the antibody test. I'm often asked that. If you've been vaccinated, should you take an antibody test to see if you responded to the vaccine or not? And again, we don't recommend it because the antibody tests, as they are at the moment, are not reliable tests to test for immunity. They are being used to test for exposure. In other words, we want to look what percentage of the population have been exposed, have been infected. There, the antibodies is a very good test. But to test for immunity, it's a little bit unreliable, and it can give misleading results, particularly antibody negative. So a lot of people who've been vaccinated who are antibody negative come knocking on the door now. What should they do? And I think we can reassure them that they are still immune despite being antibody negative. Then a question about if somebody has been isolated for 10 days and they're still not feeling great. They haven't fully recovered. They've had the COVID, mild COVID, but still not feeling great after 10 days. Can they still be infectious? The answer is no. The reason being is that these symptoms do persist for particularly fatigue. Fatigue, maybe a persistent cough, may go on for weeks afterward, but they're not infectious. The virus is no longer there. So after a period of 10 days after the start of the illness, you can be reassured if it's a mild illness. This is different with somebody who's got a severe illness and been in hospital. There we would wait until they stabilize and off oxygen and be clinically stabilized, and only start that 10-day isolation period after that period of time. But for non-hospitalized, the more milder case, after 10 days, they can return back to work. They shouldn't be infectious. Then I've been also asked about other vaccines. We have a good store of Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson. We've got 9 million doses in storage. It's enough at least for a month. Why are we looking at the Sinovac? Why are we looking at AstraZeneca? This is really to be a cushion, to be a kind of a fallback in case there's any interruption of supply with Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. Remember, we did have an interruption to the pipeline of Johnson & Johnson a few weeks ago, actually now about a month ago, and this can happen. So hopefully it won't happen because these two vaccines, the Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer, are the best vaccines. But we have examined both the AstraZeneca, which does work well, by the way, against Delta. Didn't work against the Beta variant, but works well against Delta variant. And we are looking at AstraZeneca as a fallback and also Sinovac as a fallback. It's not that these vaccines are going to be rolled out, or not that we're intending them to be rolled out. They're only going to be there as a backstop in case there's interruption with these other two prime vaccines. After COVID, how long to wait after COVID to get the vaccine? We recommend a period of a month, 30 days, after recovery from COVID. Or if one is test positive but without illness, a month after that. But after full recovery from COVID, a month to get the vaccine. The reason for this is that we don't want to get the vaccine too close to COVID, because the side effects, the minor side effects of the vaccine might be a bit more accentuated with somebody if it's too close to when they have just had COVID. So rather wait a month. In any case, you're pretty well, got a pretty good immune system, a pretty immune response to the infection, and the vaccine would really not be necessary. I think I'm going to leave it there. I've still got so many questions to answer. I'll try and get through more questions next week. But please keep rolling with your questions. We will get to them. My apologies that I'm missing out quite a few. Anyway, keep well, keep safe, and get vaccinated. Thank you very much.